Thank you very much again, dear Mmantsetsa. That was really challenging and inspiring to hear your presentation. And another issue which I especially admired and liked, and you put it in a little bit critical perspective, the issue of culture, the matter of culture. But I'm not going to address that, but you put everything in such a clear way that we have indeed to be very cautious. But what I liked the idea of context, because context matters. And even though we live in an interconnected world, in a globalized world, in globalized societies, we move from one country to another, and fashions and ideas and cultures move around, and we pick up different fashions and different cultural things, and we accommodate those, and we feel very comfortable of those. So even though we live in a very globalized world, I have a feeling that geographies matter. Geography matters because from that context, from geography, culture grows. And I think Lithuanian perspective and our own experiences matter. And I think I was referring also that 25-year history of independent state, of DMU, as a re-established higher education institution, allows us to reflect already on our histories, on our successes and also our failures. And since we are in the 21st century, and the 21st century is challenged by various issues and matters, I would like to sort of open our discussion from the point of view, what are the biggest challenges, or what are the 2, 3, or 10 top social issues, social problems that our society is facing? What do you think? What would come to your mind as a first, as a second matter or issue? Or in the other way around, after 25 years of independent state, is our society getting better or worse? Are we losing something, or are we discovering new issues, new things? So, maybe, yes, please.
I have no problem to start.
Günther, I'm sorry, it's Friday afternoon, and I'm out of the blue. I didn't even introduce the roundtable speakers, so so I'm very, very sorry for that. So it's my pleasure that there is this rich, experienced colleagues and intellectuals who have joined us on this roundtable discussion. So on my left, Professor Edvinas Račius, professor of our university, head of the Area Studies Department at Political Sciences faculty. Gintaras Steponavičius, politician, parliament member, former Minister of Education. Jonas Ruškus, professor of our university, Dean of Social Sciences faculty, and a special, could you please say the other?
Member of the Committee on Rights of Persons with Disability in the United Nations.
Yes, thank you, Jonas.
Sorry.
A little bit long, so therefore I've asked for my...
You can say it short way to say certainly.
And Madam Laura Bačinskienė, Vice Head of the Lithuanian Child and Youth Center. So thank you very much again for joining us, and of course, Mmantsetsa Marope, our plenary speaker and our expert in this endeavor. So again, my apologies, and please, Gintaras.
Thank you. Well, as a polite people, we have introduced ourselves while speaking, so the part of the job is done. So I jump into the topic immediately, while recognizing that we are in a little bit more comfortable position with the chairs compared to the audience who are listening to us, but please excuse us for that part of comfortability. Coming back to the topic, I think challenges, both looking from national and global perspective, from my point of view, are more bright than bleak. Speaking about the future of global education focuses, which have been emphasized during your presentation, one concrete facts speaking about poverty and connection with the education situation across the world. During the last decade, 1 billion people came out from the poverty, the survey says. In upcoming 10 years, another 1 billion, it is predicted, will come out from the poverty. And I think it is very strong signal saying to all of us that it is also good news for education, generally speaking. It means that societies gradually, not that fast as we would like to see them, but they are becoming more sustainably developing and moving forward, getting richer, and thus a fairly good chance more focus for education. Again, it depends on many different factors, but still I think prospects are quite good. I agree that children enrollment into the education and different levels of education may be measured from different angles, and respective countries would have a different kind of challenges. I would say our challenge here is very clear. For example, not speaking about numbers of enrollment in schools, but preschool. And I think a very clear step that 6-year-olds, obligatory, kids will be going in upcoming years to schools. And the figures across the country are growing. And it is not just about enrollment, but it's also about the quality. Is it just a child care, or it is also part of the education process? And I think all experts would agree that starting from 2 or 2.5 years, we should invest into our children with a more systematic educational exercises. And again, from different other perspectives, I think cooperation among the countries through different formats, as you can propose through International Bureau of Education and others can contribute. Lithuania has, I think, very interesting 25 years experience of living with transition. And I think this life experience can be shared with us. Not just saying that we are already accomplished everything or should relax ourselves, far from that. But I think as an open country, we should be actively contributing to that. I will stop at this point.
Well, I'm referred to quality, and I think the biggest challenge is indeed the quality of education. And when I say quality, I mean the contents. Because here in Lithuania, we don't have access problems. But the major problem when it comes to the high school and then later on university, college students is the lack of curiosity. People don't care. What we have is, we have made it accessible. So many people can actually get diplomas, can get their BAs or whatever. It's become, a normal thing to have a BA. But does this add to, your knowledge, and not sort of technical knowledge, whether you know how to operate a computer or a machine, but exactly what you referred to, this, global understanding. I don't know whether I understand global education the same way you understand. I thought of cosmopolitan education, but whatever, we don't need to go into this. But the point is that here in Lithuania, we seem not to be interested in what's going on in the world, in general. Not that they're starving kids, never mind, but in general, about the world. And this is something that's been puzzling me as someone who's been teaching about, for example, Middle Eastern societies and so on, because you would think that, media is full of this. So when you come to class and you talk to students, say, well, there was something yesterday there. I don't know. Do you watch any news? No, should we? Yes. No, it's crap, why should we? So there's an interesting thing developing here, that the youth, although they have access, and when it comes to language, many, not all, but some do speak languages, they could use that. They could go and read online German, Spanish, French, whatever. They don't do that. And this is an interesting thing. So it's, when we talk about this global dimension of really realizing we live in a world which is more than 2 countries, Lithuania versus Russia, for example, then, this world is there. I mean, if you ask this audience, how many countries are there in Africa? Probably people would guess, fairly close. Could you say, could you list them? And they would stop at 10. And if you went into the capital cities, they would stop at 5. And if you asked the population, they'd probably stop at 3. So the problem is that when we talk about quality of education, And this is what I'm referring to also, is that this is bastardization here in Lithuania, that we all need lasers. If we can sell lasers, we can be better than Israel is. Cool, we earn more, we're known. If we don't know about the world, well, who cares? Do we need to know, really? We need to sell. So this is this interesting approach to, it's sort of made into trade, sort of. Education is, you get the skills to sell yourself. And if you know about the world, but you don't sell that, well, you don't know anything, you're not educated. So I think that we are in a very, very bizarre situation, because it seems to me, and the people who were raised in the Soviet times, they could either support me or actually say that it wasn't this way. But it seems to me, I mean, I was too young probably at that time, but it seems to me that when we couldn't travel, when we couldn't really know the world, we wanted to know it. You would read about Iran, well, knowing that you would never go to Iran. Now we go and liberate Afghanistan, Iraq, we will liberate Iran next year or in 3 years' time. We just go and liberate. Do we know anything about the places we liberate? No. And then it extends into many fields. So of course then, when we have a situation developing here in Lithuania with the refugees, and you probably haven't been exposed, it's just hilarious, you know, it's pathetic. When you have the top politicians telling us that Lithuania cannot accept 200 people. And we pretend to be a developed country, EU member, Eurozone, you might have seen Euros around. So, you know, we're big. We're not. We're a third world country by many standards, which we try to deny. And, you know, there's this, you probably have seen this BBC series, Keeping Up Appearances. It's like, you know, you pretend you're something you're not. And then this is what is constantly being done in Lithuania by the politicians. No, definitely not him, but by the other parties, for sure. So, you know, the thing is that, you know, it's actually, whenever we meet people from abroad, we tell them, you know, how nice, how developed we are in this. But the reality is not necessarily that nice. And, you know, from my perspective, when I come to a class, I think it's much worse than it used to be 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Definitely much, much worse when I was in the school when it comes, and you mentioned geography. Yes, geography matters. People just simply don't know anything about the world, starting with geography, going into the societies and their developments and so on. So I think we are faced with a major problem that although we seem to be part of the globalized world, we know little about that world, and we don't even have curiosity to know more.
Thanks, Igdunas. That was challenging. Who wants to catch up on?
Yeah, I would like to highlight a little bit different perspective on global education and to other vital issues regarding the phenomena, ideals, and practice of education. In educational perspective, and educational side in Lithuania, we usually take some classical matters to education, such as processes and outcomes and methods of education, of teaching and learning, teacher competences, knowledge building, and so on. But especially I like to emphasize some cross-cutting matters, some of education, or holistic matters of education, which become more and more fundamental for well-being of all people, all communities, and all societies. I'm talking about human rights as a cross-cutting concept in education. First, I'm a member of the Committee on Rights of Persons with Disability in the United Nations, and there we see that persons who, because of their physical or sensorial or psychosocial or even social or cultural impairments and stigmas are in interaction with various barriers in the environments in our societies, and those barriers hinder their full and effective participation in society on equal basis with others. So CRPD, or Committee on Rights of Persons with Disability in the United Nations, so this is a United Nations perspective, so refers to human rights in two different ways in the education field. So first is respect for the inherent dignity and of every human being, everyone individual autonomy. Another way is respect for difference and acceptance. Persons with disabilities, which are disabilities as a part of human diversity. This implies that every person, however different he or she is seen as a full member of society, and Persons with disabilities are considered as autonomous person and freedom to make their own choice. And human rights-based statements means two major or very global impacts. One is right to education, another is inclusive education. When I'm talking about right to education, first, this means non-discrimination, non-exclusion on the basis of disabilities, cultural, social, intellectual, and so on, or economical status, and so on. Right to education means also accessibility of all educational resources for all children. In Lithuania, I think we made a lot of effort when all children has a comprehensive and free education, but still today, hundreds of boys and girls are living in the big and depersonalized institutions where children are still facing violence and human rights deprivations. We have also a situation today when accessibility to the preschool education is very limited. We are facing also limited accessibility to the higher education when exclusively academic attainments determine access to higher education, and we still cannot implement a sensitive and supportive approach to the aspiration and the capacities of children. Regarding inclusive education, we need to appreciate and encourage inclusive school where all children can learn together on the equal basis with others. Schools' ability to cope with diversity is one of the main challenges, and I think also in Lithuania, but in other countries. So we have to develop a reasonable accommodation and support systems and strategies promoting inclusive learning methods and needs assessments to maximize academic and social development. But just yesterday, I participated in one meeting, a dialogue on one initiative on inclusive education. And so we are facing to one dilemma of inclusive or quality education. So there is, we have bear in mind, there is no opposition, no contradiction between inclusive and quality, both going together. To finalize, human rights approach to education means not only, let's say, educational patterns, but also, first, it means human rights approach, means obligations of states to engage explicitly to inclusive education and ensure the right to education for all. State must remove all legal institutional barriers to education, tackle its social exclusions in accessible institutions and meritocratic policies when children are selected respectively only are selected and so respectively awarded or excluded. So I think both right to education and inclusive education are issues of global education, when global education can be understood as a cohesion of human society, development of self-identity, respect of cultural diversity, affirmation of social justice and human rights. So it's still building peaceful and just and sustainable world.
Mm-hmm. Here I would like to pause a little bit, and I can find some clear linkage between what Egdunas first referred and what Jonas, on the issues that Jonas have brought. It struck me when Egdunas said that society in some sense is getting worse, because what we see, we know less. In general terms, curiosity is fading, and ignorance in many ways is coming up, crawling in. We live in the world, in societies that are consumerist, that we are consuming a lot, too much sometimes, and what possibilities or chances are there in a society of individuals who are high achievers but have very little empathy to their next door neighbor, to build up such an inclusive and sort of integrated society. So
I really believe in the right perspective.
Human rights perspective.
Human rights perspective.
But what can we do?
Because human rights perspective emphasizes community, emphasizes living together, emphasizes solidarity and equity. So another thing is state obligation, what I told. So when state obligation, in that means regulation is also made in this way.
But what happens in such a situation that even in Lithuania, I believe, our state plays a rather modest role, not a really strong role in this respect, because it has given up in many ways. It has given up to market-oriented approach, to neoliberalist logic. It has given up in many ways also education, area of education, health. And the state doesn't play a very strong role in really setting up policies that would be designed in a sort of deliberative way. Did I make myself clear? So I see the challenge, the biggest challenge. I think on the one hand, we are young democracy and economically not really strong country. We are becoming stronger and stronger. But in many ways, I think Lithuania has jumped into the moment when Western societies, let's speak about EU, have been implementing this approach of neoliberalist ideology in their different policies.
You know, sometimes in Lithuania we believe that neoliberalism is only one approach, on what's possible way. There is no other alternative. But we do not talk, when I'm talking from perspective of human rights, I do not talk against or as an alternative to the neoliberal approach. I'm talking about Lithuanian engagement with the global process. We are in the global processes, but Lithuania, as many of countries of the world, make part of the international organizations such as UNICEF, UNESCO, and the United Nations, and so on. So there are some commitments, as for example, when we're taking conventions on rights of people with disabilities, conventions against discrimination of women, conventions of rights of child, convention against torture. So there are all commitments of the state, and state is obligation of the state to supervise this issue.
But what in that case, as Agdunas again mentioned, then the state refuses to take up 709 refugees?
Just 200. 500 are the ones who need to review their applications. We don't need to take them in. And this is another thing that is being, sort of consciously, the society is being misguided. So the number is different.
I just wanted to build on the points that were being made by the last speaker and actually the second speaker. You asked the question, what can be done about equity? I think equity and inclusion, the state must play a significant role. But in any democracy, the state is the individual citizens. And therefore, I think of a few things that need to be done is public education. Because the truth is that most of the time we talk to ourselves. Look at this room. We come here, we exchange our ideas, and invariably, any one of you in this room could have been in this podium giving the main lecture. So we are always speaking to each other. In a way, then, this monologue of ours does not carry the rest of the society with us. So I think public education in local languages, in easily accessible discourse, nobody needs a long explanation why equity is important. But we cannot take it for granted that people see inequality as offensive and as an affront. It is an affront. And then so I think public education is one concrete thing that can be done, and universities can play a very big role. You have national TV, you have national radio, you have national political squares, I don't know. But there should be many, many fora where we can engage with citizens so that the education is continuous and we continuously raise awareness past the level of awareness to advocacy. because it's not enough to be aware. You have to be, awareness is a matter of information. It's like a notice board. I saw this, but do I do anything about it thereafter? No, I'm aware of it, but it's about advocacy. So each and every one of us become an advocate and an activist for equity. This can be done. The second thing that can be done is to take a technical approach, to have very clear norms and standards in the country. And these norms and standards should have a legal binding force. So if, for instance, there's inequality across education institutions, or there's poverty, or this, if so many people are below the poverty datum line, what do we do about them? What are the mechanisms? And universities can play a very substantial role in helping to articulate these concrete instruments that will give the aspirational spiritual convictions real operational impact, which is life-changing. So we can take things out of the political realm and deal with them in the technical realm, which is objective, it's monitorable, and it's doable. And then this whole issue about people not being aware and not seeming to be interested in what happens next door. I think this is also part of public education, because it may sound ridiculous for me to say this, but quite honestly, an ordinary person who is there working and living, or a student who wants to pass, is it really intuitive to them that it matters that they should know about the guy next door? It's not necessarily intuitive. So I think we should not take things for granted because we are in the constant dialogue about these issues, and then use our experience to convey it on people who don't have the experience, and then look at them as though they are ridiculous if they do not seem to have the same level of consciousness and activeness about issues. But quite honestly, if you ask, let's say just, I don't know, a farmer or somebody, or even professionals, you know, what is happening in Botswana? The first question they're going to ask is, what is that? Forget the rest of what is happening in there. And does knowledge of what is happening there really change their lives? Does it change their mood for the day? Does it change anything about the quality of their lives? Most likely no. It changes their lives, but in such an insidious, indirect way that they don't even know. They don't know that the behavior of another country is having significant impact in the way they live. So unless you make these connections, that you cannot afford not to know about what's happening in other countries, because this is how it affects you. But where there is no clear impact on people, why should they, on the number of things that they have to juggle on a normal day, realistically speaking? So I think the issue is that we need to be realistic about our expectations, but at the same time, we need to be patient with carrying others along with us so that we can, each ring can become wider and deeper. So those are, to me, some of the concrete things. And then the education system. If our curriculum do not carry these issues that we are talking about, if the way we treat students on campus, the young kids that are growing up, if we don't start at the level of early childhood care and education and groom the new generation in a different way, why should we expect them to have a different perspective? What is it that we do on campus, just right here, that should conscientize the students? Why should they be different? So I think that these are some of the very concrete ways. So I would suggest you map out, you create a roadmap and map out the critical points at which you could actually infuse a certain amount of learning opportunities in our museums, in our parks, in our archives, in our social gatherings, what are we talking about? Are we carrying the messages? And I think, to me, this is the third leg of the university responsibility. It's publish or perish. It's teaching, and it's community service. But community service means being able to connect to the communities and carry our communities along with us. I also want to highlight this, yes, about the statistics, because we often show success in statistics, but there is more than meets the eye. I travel a lot, and I go to countries, and you get the statistics of so many billion people are of the poverty, got out of poverty. But let's get into a specific context. What does this really mean? Does this mean that this guy now lives on $3 per day? Because the poverty datum line was 2.5? And is this really exiting poverty? What poverty are we talking about? And to me, I think we need to unpack the word poverty. And the most damning poverty that people suffer is capability poverty. Ability to contribute, and the information poverty, knowing your rights and therefore being able to exercise your rights. But these datum lines are about material poverty, that the datum line is drawn here. And then poverty is also relative, because to the extent that there is wealth in a country, a somehow comfortable person in one country could be a poor person in another country. So these statistics are very encouraging, and indeed we should build on them. But I think we have to have a little bit more nuanced approach to what is poverty, how does it express itself. If I have $3 per day now, and yesterday I was on $1 per day, am I really non-poor? Am I really non-poor? Could any one of us really be comfortable with the thought that I'm going to live on $3 per day? But for statistical purposes, those people have been lifted out of poverty. It's just like the enrollment and the access to education that we talk about. And as you say, yes, we have no problems of access, but the access is only mostly symbolic. And that's why we get the statistics that tells us that, well over 130 million children who get to grade 5 in primary education have not yet attained sustainable literacy. It's 2 years or so ago, I went to the European Parliament to launch with the Commissioner the European Literacy Report, and it reported that a quarter of Europeans are functionally illiterate. And can you afford to be functionally illiterate in Europe? So I think, yes, we are making progress, and there is a lot to celebrate, but at the same time, it's a better challenge for us to push forward and push forward. My contention, my biggest contention about the way we express poverty is that a lot of those people who are said to be uplifted out of poverty, to me, are still very poor, and they are in squalor situations. And we're not talking about minimum comfort, just simply squalor situations. But something has been just jigged a little bit up and a little bit up. It's not enough. So the context, what I would prefer is for a country to ask, okay, what is poverty in Lithuania? And what is this level below which we won't allow any Lithuanian to sink? And then we stay there, but we have to be ready that this level will keep going up and going up. But there's also a little bit of discomfort when I hear the poverty discussion sometimes being pitted as an attack on the rich. Because I think that we do need to motivate people to get rich. But if that wealth is balanced with the global citizenship, as we were discussing it, then perhaps you are more able to share your wealth in a manner that lifts others. And sometimes the most individualistic, excuse my language, selfish people get so filthy rich that finally they manage the world. They maintain and support the world. So I think we need to look at these issues a little bit more. But I think we need to ask ourselves, what can we do? Get down and do it. Just get down and do it, and not just talk about equity and talk about this and talk about this. Just get down and do it. And as we do it, the context will challenge us, will get better. So we shouldn't wait to be perfect. We just have a threshold of comfort that we can start. Let's start. And then we just keep refining as we go.
Thank you. Laura?
I heard that we have so many challenges, but I want to tackle also that those challenges are driving us for changes also. And I wouldn't be so pessimistic that Lithuania is so bad. We have also the numbers that Lithuanian, especially young people, are very well, those people who are changing the situation of to the global education, they are willing to donate for other countries and so on. So we have lots of possibilities, and we are not only talking about what we could do on global level, but we are also doing. I was asked to talk here on perspective from Education and Science Ministry because we had their working group preparing the conception for global education. It's a conception which is driven not from the politicians but mostly from those actors who are working in this field. And there is no need just to draft the paper. But the challenge is to understand what is global education, because most common language it was the development education, how to help others. But it's also very important to talk how we could act locally and then influence what is happening on global level. And I could mention lots of examples when we had in Lithuania, we had lots of examples and lots of good projects when youngsters are going abroad doing some good job, and when they are doing in some small villages activities which you don't feel or you don't know that it's influenced the global level, but it does. The global education has a different dimension. It has different topics like ecological science and so on. And I really wouldn't look at the situation very pessimistic. It's only just it's three levels of global education. It's about knowing or willing to know about others, understand that you can do something for better way, and to do it, to act in reality. That's our conception is about that. And I liked your presentation very much because you gave me the concrete answer, which I could use for talking to others about global education. But the education field is very influenced in the other spheres, but it cannot work separately. It has to be supported by other areas. So hopefully we will move forward, not with the paper, but real acts on global education.
Please.
I would like just to react. I like provocative speaking of Egdunas, but I'm a positively thinking person. So thereby I would say there is no black or white painting of one another country and ourselves. In our society we have very different people with very different approaches, pessimistic, passive, and then so on. I agree to a large extent that can we, as a provincially thinking country, be actively contributing globally? I agree very much. And it is shameful examples of the minister speaking that part of the society is non-existing and we should not accept the partnerships. It's a shame to hear on such level such statements. Or it is also a shame that we cannot accept 700 refugees. It is a shame, yes, I agree, but it is not the reason to blame the whole society about that. Therefore, I say we better encourage those who want to do something and not just to complain about those passive part of the society. And I think the free society is also always winning when we give a chance to move forward those who feel themselves a true citizenship. I disagree that we are sort of passive to know what is going on next door. In Lithuania, never been so high civic engagement as it is today. Thanks to the Ukraine, first of all. It is a factor accidentally, but it woke up the society, especially the younger generation. Look how many people voluntarily are going to the conscription now, which is renewed, voluntarily. Look how many young people have joined very different kinds of civic actions. And I could give you hundreds of examples. And sorry, Ekdunas, not knowing one or another capital in the corner of the world does not necessarily mean that our factology-based interest is somewhat diminishing. We are living in the context where we now should emphasize why there is a problem with the quality. I agree. Quality, to a large extent, is not the brightest, so to say, here at different levels. And I think across the world, and the answer for us is the same. How to make teaching process, how to make curricula interesting. What way you, academicians or teachers at school, can be able to attract pupils' interest. How to engage them, not just having a task to know more capitals or countries during the night when you're woke up, but the way that you be interested to learn and to get better in finding all this information and apply it. That's the question, I think. And therefore, I think we can learn from each other. And again, I 100% agree that aspects by Professor Ruškus about exclusion of parts of the society is making a bad sign for the whole Europe. Today, I think Europe, not only us, are in a not very good shape in that respect. And again, how long it will take for us to become like Norwegians or Swedes globally engaged to such extent as it has been done, but they've done it or achieved during 50 or 60 years. We are still on the way, and I hope that there will be more initiative from below. That there is no obstacles, I think, to a large extent on the government or political level. It is up to the bright minds to take initiative.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to respond?
I think that this is definitely right, because probably we need to think in terms of supply and demand. And in this regard, of course, we might always ask the state to get involved more and you know, give us the universities, because we're extremely poor here. I don't know, you know probably that we have 43 universities here in Lithuania. I mean, it's less than 3 million, and we have 43 universities. It's just incredible. Most of them are state universities, and they all are extremely poor. We can always go back to the state and say, well, you know, he used to be the minister, would you give us some cash? So, you know, that's one thing. The other thing is, as you suggested, that, you know, we initiate something. But the thing is that here, even in Kaunas, we would initiate all sorts of things that would probably fall under this caption of cultural awareness. We had some African poets come, and then, you know, we opened this opportunity. Do people come to these events? No, they don't. So, you know, the thing is, we supply that. Is there demand? No. So then, you know, what do? Shall I, you know, undress myself in the hall room so that, you know, people say, oh, that's some show, some attraction, we'll come and look at this? No, you don't do it this way. So the point here is that what I tried to say is, of course, trivial about whether people know all the 220 capitals. No, but it's not about the capitals. It's not about whether you know Ouagadougou or not. It's about what there is next to that name, that you have a society which has its own unique culture. And for example, we have all these discussions here about, let it be about homosexuals. What about polyandry as a way, you know, for partnership, when a woman wants to have more than one husband? Can we discuss that? We don't even know that there's such options somewhere in India and elsewhere. This is what I refer to. So it's in this global education, it's not only that we know that Ukraine is close and then is being attacked by Russia, so therefore we have incentive to join the military here in Lithuania. It's not about these things. It's about really realizing the options in the world. And we are very closed on ourselves, and we have these several things that we have been preoccupied with, you know. And it's indeed, I know why the students don't watch news, because it's extremely boring. You know, for the past 2 weeks, whenever we have news, it's always about one aircraft that had an accident and then 2 pilots died. So, you know, you don't watch this news because they don't tell you anything about the world. And you're absolutely right that now we have access to any news. You can go, and then this is, I have absolutely have to agree with you.
Every second person in Kaunas knows who is Cesaria Vora or Richard Bona through jazz or music. So you should not...
I'm not sure every second knows, okay?
Every third,
okay.
10,000...
I like when the politicians say, you know, every third or half or this and that. You need to do research, and when you do research, you come up with findings that are depressing. So, you know, I don't know on the, well, maybe you're right. Hopefully you are, which I don't think you are, but once we do some research...
I am optimistic.
Fair enough.
Can I add to the optimist? But I think it really isn't... I think we react to the slices of realities that we interact with. And it just struck me when you were talking about this knowledge of capital cities, which to me is not trivial. I'm often struck, you know, that a European, for instance, will ask me, do you know Sarah Brightman? Even though I know, I say no, just deliberately. Oh, you don't know her? No. Oh, she's da-da-da-da-da. And I, you know, yeah. But and then I turn around and ask them of a musician in my own country or region, do you know this? And they look at me, not only with, why should I know that? Or they even exist, these things, where you come from. So let's I mean, this is, we can use examples that may sound a bit over-exaggerated. But the truth is that there is some level of disinterest in what happens in the world, particularly when that world is not very, very close to you. If Lithuania helped, and I was struck by this, could we also look at the media? Why do people know about, Ukraine? Why do people know more now about Ukraine? Because something unpleasant happened. So let's go to the media. What does the media report? If it is good, if there is no, you know, my country is one of those countries that is simply not known. An average European, I can tell you this, American European, if you ask them first, they don't even think the word exists. They can't figure it out in their ears. They ask you Bhutan, whatever. So the reason, though, is that these are not, but if you talk about Zimbabwe or South Africa, because there were wars and this and that, everybody immediately. So perhaps there's something about the way the media also exposes us, that when good is happening, the media generally does not. Had Ukraine been fast developing, excellent or what, would there have been such a hype? So perhaps we need to look at, when we talk about global education, do we need a catastrophe in order to know about a country or to know about other people? And hopefully we should say no, we don't need to have a disaster before we can pay attention. But the channels that bring this information to us in a way select for us a priori. And it's mainly, this is again another slice of education. When I used to work a lot with the Association for the Development of Education in Africa, we got to a point where we really launched an education program for media, for journalists. Just to say, stop that, it will be newsworthy only when something drastic happened, you know, in an education system, that teacher raped that child, suddenly it's news. But that teacher, the kids are doing very well, is not news. So maybe we need to look at what creates interest and what are the drivers behind this interest. And where there is disinterest, should we create levels? But before we say yes, we should ask, why is it important for us to create new levels of interest in these issues? So it's not just that people are disinterested or they are heartless or whatever. It's also the channels that come to them may also have some contribution, and maybe this is another angle that we should look at, especially for the journalists.
Yeah. Then I've heard, I was really ready to ask about the issue of media, but what we discussed here, of course, there was an issue of quality, and quality in education, quality in university teaching and learning, quality of media, and in general, I think we should pose the question, what kind of democracy, what kind of quality of democracy do we need to have quality in education, quality in media? I think
that's true.
Because decisions are made by people, groups of people, or organizations. We are here, we are people, and we are trying to make a quality university, quality teaching and learning, and we are trying to do that. I can, let's imagine that we succeed one day, but maybe we fail another day, but we are still trying, and I think this idea to launch the idea or the initiative of global education was one or sort of next step that we have achieved at the university. But one issue that came, or one question that came to my mind is that what can we do as people? Because we have to, perhaps to start with ourselves, but one qualitative or cultural thing I think that is missing in Lithuania generally, and I think you, Mmantsetsa, mentioned it, this advocacy. I think in many ways this advocacy feature, we are persuading ourselves today. We do not need to persuade ourselves. Everybody of us, we know why we are here and why we are concerned with the idea of global education, with social citizenship and political citizenship and cultural citizenship and global citizenship, and we are concerned with those, and we are challenged with those issues. But how can we spread and how can we apply those policies? How we can move into real life situations with university setting, within university setting? We are doing that on a daily basis, and we have had this experience of liberal arts education. And one example could be, I brought that example to Liliana, who represents UNESCO Commission here in Lithuania. Then I referred to the issue of training future journalists. And we said that one day we really understood that future-to-be journalists have to have an empathy. They have to have sort of understanding not only of matters of political or economic concern, but they also have to know how to talk to people and be sensitive. And we decided to have the journalistic training, for instance, integrating it into service-based training. So that students would go for service into orphanages, into hospitals, and to really see the other side of the world. Perhaps their family is rich and they would never see this type of life if they are not confronted. But they want to be journalists. So we thought that it's the skills that are or should be trained at university. So in a sense, the more opportunities we create, either at school or university, to see the other side, or to sort of to become more curious. That's I still cannot find the real good medicine that would really solve that issue. But perhaps we can find moments in our own lives when we examine ourselves how we came to the point of today and why we are here, and maybe in our own learning experience, our own biographies, we have those critical moments and those critical points and those moments of high awareness that tell us, I cannot live the way I lived before that moment. So each of us probably have these critical moments, and if we spread this word to our classrooms, and ask students. I strongly believe, even though I work in the field of media and journalism, but I strongly believe that communication solves everything, solves all the problems, or creates problems actually, miscommunication. But going back to this idea that decisions are made by people, and I think we have to go to really understand what are mentalities and what are the value systems that are cultivated in certain contexts and geographic spots. So that's sort of a broader setting and reflection. Maybe I would make one more round, and then I would ask audience to join this. Maybe one question would be related to the question. Mmantsetsa referred to media, to politicians. Jonas referred to government or politicians, government policies. But what is the role of business in this context? Yes, Laura, please.
I would like to refer. You talked also about the advocacy and private sector. It's not separately what is happening also in private sector. And it doesn't happen like you get global citizenship when you are in university. It starts when you are when you are a child in your family, and you are doing your advocacy job just every day. Like when you meet a foreigner, when you go abroad and act somehow. I could say we probably don't notice what have changed in Lithuania. But for instance, I could see when I'm driving the car, I could see if somebody is throwing out from the car trash, it's not Lithuanian, for sure. And I'm going further, I will not mention the country which is it. But the private sector is also influenced very much. Like there's more and more international companies, and you, as a worker of international company, you are becoming also becoming this global citizenship, because your colleagues are from Somalia or from Lebanon or from France or whatever, from Germany, and you have to understand the culture of your people, your colleagues with whom you are working, or how you are interact your business with other countries. You are not working only in Lithuania, the market is too small, so you are open for all the countries. And if you want to interact, I was doing many years international work, and if you want to do the qualitative job, you have to know the nation with whom you are working, what you have to suggest, how you have to talk with them, how you have to interact. So the private sector is also influencing that very much, and advocacy is happening just every day. You don't have to teach it. You understand that from your bad behavior, somebody will have the view that all Lithuanians are bad.
Okay, thank you, Laura. So, the role of private sector or business?
I believe the private sector already plays a big role, like she's saying, because the private sector, the more competitive it gets, the more global it gets. So by its nature, it's a sort of for the analogy, but it's like churches. They have the tendency to convert more and more and more. So they are always pushing frontiers. So it's a good source of intercultural exposure, multicultural exposure, and also of different ways of working. Because they are by nature trying to survive and improve the bottom line. So they're always experimenting with different ways of working. So I think the private sector could help a lot. But where, to me, sometimes the private sector is a bit disappointing is when it comes to their responsibility to plow back what they benefit from the respective countries, particularly if they are satellite companies. Invariably, companies that are homegrown and they are owned by nationals tend to have a more empathy towards the development of the country. But the private sector that comes from outside sometimes gets a little disconnected to what ought to be their responsibility. So as much as we emphasize the role of government in providing education, the private sector normally gets the cream of the crop because they have the ability to pay better wages. And therefore, you would expect that as they benefit from the education system, they should have serious interest in supporting the education system, in reaching the levels of quality that we want, and in reaching the microeconomic relevance. The private sector is on the code phase of what the microeconomy needs and what is required. So they could contribute quite a lot. But at the larger corporate level, speaking from the side of a multilateral, I'm quite warmed by the response of the private sector when I go to them to look for support for different programs that were a huge private sector. But at the country level, I really think they could do more not only financially, but time. One of the things that the private sector people are very stingy about is their time. Trying to get the private sector into one room, because we work with countries that are trying to foster development relevance of the education system. The private sector is the front row of the microeconomy. But try to get private sector chiefs to come into a meeting where the country is really debating the future, development strategies, so that they can really contribute intellectually, and because they are multinationals, they could contribute from many experiences. They would send the most junior person into this room, and they not necessarily want to spend the time and their intellect. So I think, and this is not a stereotype. This is not all private sectors are like this. But I do believe that you have a better chance of having a member of parliament and a minister stand and stay here to discuss something because it's just of national interest and not because he has idle time in his calendar. But try to get a private sector person of equal standing. You are pressed. So I think the role of the private sector to me should be improving their contribution, their intellectual contribution to shaping development, and because they are the ones who are always complaining that when whoever graduates from wherever they come without the skill sets required, then come and tell us what it is that you require. Most importantly, how we can facilitate its development. This, I think, we need to see a little bit more. It's not enough to cut a check and put it on my lap and go. It's much more valuable, in my view, if they were helping countries really shape their, long-term macro and microeconomic outlooks. They could be inside the dialogue that helps the countries to forge ahead. But having said that, I am quite warmed by the reception that we get often when I approach the private sector for contribution. And incidentally, what is refreshing, they are not interested in just cutting a check. They want to be seen to be working on the content. They want to plow in their experience. What I would like is to see what I'm seeing at a multilateral level. I would like to see it at a national level so that the private sector really gets integrated into the country, regardless of whether or not they are from the country. The point is that they are benefiting from the country's education outputs, and they are benefiting financially by doing business in the country. So there is, to me, a compelling reason for the private sector to take a little bit more interest and a little bit more initiative. There are countries where the private sector does this, and it's quite warming. I was in Singapore a while time ago, and looking at vocational education and training. And you go to other countries, one of the most harrowing things about vocational education and training to any government is keeping up the current equipment in the schools, because no government really can afford to be replenishing equipment, and the equipment in Tibet is very expensive. But you don't want your students to be graduating and obsolete and they cannot operate anything. But the Singaporeans somehow managed to strike relationships with the private sector that when you walk into their classrooms, if it's a cosmetics classroom, it's like you are walking on the floor of the manufacturer. And they're telling us most of the graduates from these technical schools in Singapore, when they graduate, they are sent as managers already. They know the product right up to the belts and the ladders and the aprons and everything, or a simulated patient who is displaying somewhere inside the classroom. This is very, very rare. And I think a little bit of that, I don't know how the Singaporeans managed to get to this type of relationship, but I found it really, really refreshing. And then they have a cadre of international managers that they can deploy, but they are deploying them to those countries because in those countries they're not doing the same, therefore they cannot find manager-ready graduates. So this is something that I think the private sector could help with quite a bit. They have rich experience, quite honestly, and I think it would help us a lot in education.
Well, I think the sooner we will start treating private sector as an integral part of education, the better will be for the whole education. It is my thesis, because we are used to see that the private education, be it kindergarten or university, it is just for the elite. We are now living ages from such thinking when we speak about such countries like Sweden, Netherlands, or other countries. But still, it is a problem with our mentality. Look, kindergarten problem. If we treat child care, be it 6 or 7 years or 5 years old, as a public good, and it is a state responsibility. Who can provide the service? It is already of a secondary importance. And Kaunas or Vilnius are excellent examples. If the state empowers with a financing machinery instrument that the service should be provided at the lowest cost, at the most efficient way, at the most innovative way dealing with the child, the private sector will be much faster than the government will respond with the building new kindergartens and so on. And I think it is nothing, again, to talk about rich or poor. In Sweden, private kindergartens and school are charged 0 krona. 0 krona, because they are financed as a public good on the same equal footing as the public schools. And I think as soon as we get out our closed box thinking that they and are private and public, the better we will start and the more cooperations we will have. Take vocational training you mentioned. In Lithuania, out of 80 vocational training schools, about 30 are now public entities where one of the founders are one of the companies or business associations. And in most of the cases we see that in these schools it is faster adjustment to the market labor needs, that it is usually better quality with the management and things alike. I'm speaking not that we should go and talk to the business, please get involved. Just make them part of the system on the equal basis, and I think we will achieve more. And the same goes with the universities. The more business will feel that they have a say, not just to sit around the table, but as it is in Scandinavia, Britain or United States, being part of with academic community, dealing with strategic matters of universities, the more society will win. I know it is not just 100% consensus about this topic, for sure, but still I believe that from cooperation between public and private we can achieve more.
Just a very quick point, but triggered by the comment, is that one of the benefits to me of the private sector's intellectual engagement is the discipline that the private sector conducts its business with. And that they could, working with the private sector as an intellectual partner, as a substantive partner, not just sign me a check, would help to change our work, our culture of work in government entities. Because the private sector is driven by profit margins, efficiency, effectiveness, because if they slag a little bit, they will get out of business, yes. And therefore this culture could be, if we work with the private sector, could be quite an asset in the public sector to change the way of work in the public sector, especially to change accountability for resources and to drive value for investment and get returns on investment, which the private sector is their second nature. So this intellectual technical partnership with the private sector has other soft capital, which will turn into hard capital, because if government public entities could be more resource efficient, that is making money and make our systems a little bit more sustainable. So that's another value of the private sector, is their culture of work.
Thank you. We are talking a little bit more than 1 hour already. We are behind our schedule a little bit, but I would like now to open the floor to our audience, if there would be a comment, a question, an idea.
At this point of the Friday?
At this point, early Friday afternoon, just before the break. Not yet. Well, now, actually, as I said, that we are a little bit behind our schedule, but I still would like to ask my colleagues who are at these two roundtables if there is still a burning issue that you would like to contribute to this discussion, because there were many beautiful ideas put on the table on the idea of understanding responsibility, understanding ideas of curiosity and advocacy, and in general, I think we have to really comprehend and understand the idea of public good. I think we have to understand that learning and education.
Actually, I was having a question, but it was already touched, so it's not a bit hesitant whether to ask it. I mean, my question was basically to the guest and to Günther. I mean, when we talk about the general education, I think everyone here agrees totally that it's a public good, and I mean, people should be literate, etc., etc. I think more hell breaks out when we talk about higher education and whether it is a real public good, and where we find this delicate point of balance between public good and private good, and to what extent business contributes in the lack of resources. And if it is a public good, then how do we achieve really this consolidated quality in the public education? When you have like 43 universities in a poor country, I mean relatively poor country, Western European terms, like Lithuania, do we introduce the private sector mentality within this kind of public sector of education, higher education? Then we end up with a question, is there really a level playing field between public educational institutions and private educational institutions, which receive basically, which compete for the same funding? Because public institutions are very often quite bureaucratic, not by their own inclination, but also by following all these complex regulations that we are supposed to follow, like public procurement, etc., etc. So basically there are many, many more questions when we enter this public and private sector debate. I mean, how do we make private sector equitable? I mean, really, not really. I mean, they're very good at efficiency, but they're not extremely good at legitimacy, equity, and many all these more complex social concepts. So really, how do we find this very delicate balance in this combination of two worlds? I think it's a very open question, because I mean, we have to raise them, they're always here. So I mean, basically you were talking very much about public good perspective. Gintaras has quite a bit of experience in this like private sector. I mean, I would say maybe liberal approach in education. So just a bit of discussion about how we really find this proper balance in practical terms. Just imagine.
I think the proper balance would be when it doesn't matter which university or which school you go to, whether it's private or public, the quality is decent enough that parents can send their children to a private school or to a public school and the child is guaranteed a good quality education. And a lot of that would come from compensatory type of financing, where the private sector may be able to inject more resources. The government should be able to compensate for the areas where it's only public financing, but also from the private sector contributing where they don't necessarily own, but they contribute as part of their general contribution. But another very important part is the regulatory framework, and whether the regulatory framework in a country is really applied, because there is another extreme case where the private schools are established in response to unmet demand for education in very poor countries. And these private schools charge high fees, and they are actually of worse quality and worse efficiency if they're just businesses. And businesses that don't provide a service on top of that. And therefore, if the regulatory framework that really enables that levels the playing field would be one of the significant contributions that the government can play, because only the government can put in place a regulatory framework and ensure that it is actually enforced and there are consequences. But you are right, private contributions can be a source of inequality. You know, that's what happens with neighborhood schools in the US. That schools are as good as the wealth of the neighborhood they happen to be in, because the parents contribute intellectually, they contribute financially, and so on. And there is a point at which the government can compensate, but there's a point at which it's just not affordable. And this is why I was talking about we have to have thresholds. That if a school, for instance, falls below this threshold of quality and equity, we can close it. And that's where the regulatory framework happens. The problem with education is it's such a holy cow that no politician dares to say, I'm going to close this kindergarten, because it's just a business, it's ripping. And then when you close it, you don't have anything where kids can go. So the people then can, unscrupulous private sector can play to this reality that education is too sensitive to touch, especially if that touching means denying it. So I think a regulatory framework, clear thresholds for quality, and then making sure that each school is at least at that level. The countries like Norway and Sweden, Finland, have fairly equitable, I mean, it's not equal 100%, but they have fairly equitable education system, so much so that it doesn't really matter whether a child is in a private school or a public school. And this is what we should be striving for, that if parents choose to send their children to a private school, maybe they just want a snobbish appeal, but the child would not have been disadvantaged by going to a public school. So yes, fundamentally I believe education is a public school without compromise. But I also believe that the private sector should be a good partner and a strong one, and it should be enabled in an enabling environment to play its part. So regulation and compensatory financing and definition of thresholds that we hold our hand to the fire, that this is the minimum quality that each and every child must have, and that minimum should be very high. It should not be like the poverty datum lines, for education, because of the consequences of education. But yes, it's not simple. I totally agree with you. It's a balance.
Well, I would look from the different angle. What can good school do, for example, for neglected area. Concrete examples with the charter schools in United States, surveys show that who came in the regions with a high crime rate, with huge unemployment, can change neglected environment into the positive. And I think this is a very encouraging examples where private initiative, where the normal funding for the parents and the taxpayers is provided, can bring change, not for the elite, but for those who are in real need. And I think, again, this different angle for the complementing your examples. But I would say, yes, in our case, higher education is a public good as long as the state is providing funding. And I think about 55% of all students at universities and colleges are receiving state funding. And it is just more a question not about universities and colleges, but about the students and respecting their choice. Actually, that's the problem. If they can freely go with the public money to their chosen university, then it's fine. I agree that over-regulation of all levels of education is a problem for better quality. It is an obstacle, not a prerequisite. And I don't believe in a single recipe to achieve quality in education through centralized way. It is just so misleading and so reminding Soviet times we lived in that we should not look back again. So therefore I would say we should move in the same manner as we did with the universities in Lithuania, to give them as much freedom as it is given now. For example, salaries are not anymore regulated by any single legal act in this country than the statute of university. With the property, still some steps to move ahead. With academic freedom, I think the more courage there will be to get from the trap of SKVC and more relying on independent evaluation, the more freedom you will exercise, but again, the matter of the resources. But I believe in deregulated education, generally speaking, because too bureaucratized system, too formalized, looking into just figures, but not the essence, is killing our creativity. And my last idea, what you asked, what would be the idea or recipe for education? Focus on creativity, starting from kindergarten, going to the school. And I think there are already nice initiatives and good examples with creative partnerships in Lithuania. More than 100 schools have been involved in Lithuania. I think even working with the difficult people with creative approach, we can achieve a lot.
Okay, thank you. So last words, if there is still an idea, what could sort of bring the nation together, bring the country together? No? Jonas?
Maybe it's not a few points. I just would like to refer to some contemporary moral philosophy like John Tronto or others talking about not an alternative, but some other ways of thinking than only liberal or neoliberal thinking about care society or decent society, when so talking about being back to the solidarity, being back to the community. So I feel so I see some points of reconciliating private and public. I have an example. Just last week, Lithuanian president came to our community, a large community where we are living and working and spending a time together with people having intellectual disabilities, psychosocial disabilities. And in this community, we have quite close link with private sector. When private sector is coming to the communities and helping and contributing, but not only contributing to the community living and community-based services, but they also learning from it. So there are learning from the community how to. So and even we made some kind of activities when we're spending time together, businessmen and businesswomen, and together with people having intellectual disabilities, and it's built some what we call the soft capital, great soft capital. So I see some niche, also very interesting niche of cooperation between business community in the terms of educational perspective.
Laura, would you like to?
I know. I'm just listening that even on the university level, private sector is not cooperating with certain universities. It's also influenced because next to it, like private university is influencing another public university to be more proactive, to look at their quality, because students are choosing where to go. It doesn't matter. Probably on the public university they don't count how much money state is giving for them for their studies, but they know how much money they spend for the private university. So they are asking for the quality. They are more proactive and involved in the quality. So just even the private university, if it's or the private sector is not collaborating with the university, is influencing it. Just in my opinion.
Thank you. Mmantsetsa, final word?
It's never either or. It's always blends, categories, and it depends on the context and the need. If a country is at a level of maturity and financial resilience where you can deregulate education, perhaps you can survive it. But could you imagine in a poor country where you leave even the salaries and other things deregulated, and the inequalities it will lead to, because the professoriate will just vote with their feet, and the schools and that. So it's really, we can't take a rigid approach to complex problems. And so it's, I think, openness, and even with PPPs. I mean, there are countries who whether it's health or education, where PPPs are driving development. But it's because they fit in a particular context at a particular time in history. So the context is also about time. Are we mature for what and for what reason? So to me, it's the private sector has a big role to play, but the government has an even bigger role, because the government has a role to provide, but also to create an enabling environment for other providers to thrive, and to support other providers, and to regulate other providers. Whereas the private sector is a provider, but it's not a regulator nor an enabler in the same way as a. So I don't think that any education system is as serious as its government. To me, that's the best test of whether this government is a serious government or is running a banana republic. It's how it treats its education system, and it's hard-nosed. But in terms of the blend, the solutions have to be context appropriate and open. Whatever works best, then we do it. But it's neither this or that. It can never be. It can never work that way.
Thank you.
So you also have the same banana republic.
It's a country.
It's common.
Okay, on this beautiful note and leading to one word of freedom, I think we have reached a kind of a terminal stop towards our further going on horizon for all those challenges. And I indeed want to thank very much Dr. Mmantsetsa Marope, Director of International Bureau of Education.